So in this section, we're going to look at the process of the synthesis of ATP in the cell. Okay, so this is your syllabus. It says that explain the synthesis of ATP by the transfer of phosphate in a substrate-linked reactions, as well as chemiosmosis in membranes of mitochondria and chloroplasts. So for the three reactions I mentioned, one of the reaction is over here. The second and the third reactions are over here. So altogether, three reactions. Okay, so we're going to look at these three reactions in more detail now. So first one, ATP synthesis. ATP can be synthesized by means of phosphorylation, means we add inorganic phosphate to ATP to form ATP. So all ATP synthesis is by the process called phosphorylation. Okay, regardless of which one. And of course, there are three ways. Number one, substrate-level phosphorylation. Number two, oxidative phosphorylation. Number three, photophosphorylation. So all are phosphorylation. Okay, so let's look at number one, substrate-level phosphorylation. So what is the meaning of substrate-level phosphorylation? Now, respiration is a pathway. So which means to say that the respiration is made up of many, many steps that are involved. So you got A plus B, which is actually your carbohydrate, glucose plus oxygen. Eventually, you learn that glucose and oxygen becomes CO2 and water, right? But CO2 and water is not produced immediately. It has to go through many, many steps. So let's say C plus D. Then after that, E plus F plus G, right? Then after that, H. And then becomes I. So let's say, for example, I is the final product. So all you have learned about the respiration so far is A plus B becomes I, right? But actually it involves many, many reactions, right? So therefore, this whole thing here that I have written down here is called the pathway. So the pathway is actually a series of reactions. It's made out of a series of reactions, right? So therefore, in this series of reaction, I can say that this is one reaction here, right? In this reaction, A and B are the substrates, okay? And C and D are the products, okay? And then in the second reaction, here, so this is another reaction, right? So in this reaction, C and D becomes a substrate. E and F becomes a product. So therefore, over here, can you see that C and D can be a product? It can also be a substrate. So therefore, C and D can be called the intermediate substrate. So all the substrates in the in-between reactions of a pathway, they are called the intermediate substrates. So C, D, E, F, G, H, all of them are intermediate product. So A and B are the original substrate, the first one, and I is the final product. So the rest of them are intermediate substrate as well as intermediate product. Okay, so this is to explain the meaning of the word intermediate substrate. So in substrate-level phosphorylation, this is the definition or the meaning of substrate-level phosphorylation. So what happened is a phosphate group or energy from an intermediate metabolic substrate, right, which are all the C all the way until H, just now I mentioned, they are intermediate metabolic substrate. Metabolic means the reaction, so intermediate reaction substrate. So the phosphate or the energy from this substrate is transferred to ADP to make ATP. So which means to say that, let's say, for example, I take C just now, and let's say C has got a phosphate attached to it. So the C will donate the phosphate so that my ATP, ADP, can plus this phosphate from the CP in order to form ATP plus C. So the phosphate from ATP is already taken and placed into here. So this is called substrate-level phosphorylation. That means the phosphate comes from the intermediate substrate of respiration. Okay, so this is the first way. So I have explained the phosphate coming from the intermediate metabolic substrate. Sometimes the intermediate metabolic substrate like C, it does not carry any phosphate, but it carries energy. So in that case, what happens is that the C will donate the energy so that ADP can plus the energy, and then the energy is used to add inorganic phosphate from the cell to form ATP. So in this case here, C is donating the energy for this process so that Pi inside the cell can be joined to the ADP to form ATP. So therefore, in both ways, they are called substrate-level phosphorylation. So you either use the phosphate group from the intermediate substrate, or you use the energy from the intermediate substrate in order for ATP to be synthesized. So this is called substrate-level phosphorylation. And this intermediate substrate is the intermediate substrate of respiration pathway. Okay? Right. So let's move on. Anyone got any question? Now, without involving respiratory chain or ETC, you will not know until later on. So we ignore this part first. Okay? We ignore this part that's so detailed. So you learn a little bit at a time. So example of the process for substrate level phosphorylation is glycolysis and Krebs cycle, which you will learn later on also. So now you don't have to know this part yet. Later on, when you learn this one, you can put everything together when you do your revision. Now you will not understand, so ignore this part. Okay, understand? Ignore it. Okay. Now, so just now I've explained the first way of synthesizing ATP by the cell, which is substrate level phosphorylation. Now, the second and the third way is oxidative phosphorylation and photophosphorylation. Now, it is very interesting. Oxidative phosphorylation is a process that occurs in the mitochondrion. Okay? During the oxidation of our respiratory substrate, energy is released for phosphorylation to occur. So this one occurs in the mitochondrion in the respiration process, right? Photophosphorylation. So photo means the light energy, right? So this only happens in plant cells, right? So plant cell harness light energy and use the light energy to synthesize ATP. Whereas here, mitochondrion use the energy from carbohydrate, lipids, and protein, oxidize them so the energy can be used to synthesize ATP. So this is the two ways of synthesizing ATP. Using respiration, they oxidize the carbohydrate, lipids, and protein, so energy is released to synthesize ATP. In plant, they harness the light energy, the photo, and then using the light energy to phosphorylate the ADP to form ATP. So this is a general explanation of these two processes, right? Now, detailed explanation. Let's look at detailed explanation. What is detailed explanation? It's very easy. Now, these two processes both involve chemiosmosis. These two processes both involve chemiosmosis is also a process. I'll explain this one later on. So they both of these processes or reactions involve chemiosmosis, which occurs in the membrane of mitochondrion as well as chloroplast. So this one occurs in the mitochondrion and this one occurs in the chloroplast. Okay, so how to understand this part is very easy. Do you know hydroelectric dam? And how does hydroelectric dam produce electricity? It is similar for our mitochondria and chloroplast in producing ATP. It's very similar. Okay, so this is a picture showing you a hydroelectric dam. So let's recall back how the electricity can be produced from this hydroelectric dam is we have got a reservoir to store the water. So the water will have got potential energy. When we open the gate, the water will flow through the gate, okay? And then it will turn the turbine. When it turns the turbine, then electricity will be generated, okay? So after that, the water will flow to the river. And then the water will evaporate from the river, goes to the sky, and it will rain again to recycle the water back to the reservoir. So this is how our electricity is being produced by the hydroelectric dam. So for chemiosmosis method of producing ATP is also similar, but it occurs in our mitochondrion and chloroplast. We got no chloroplast. It occurs in our mitochondrion and chloroplast of the plant. Okay, right. So let's look at, hang on, let me check something first. Okay, so let's start with mitochondrion. Okay, mitochondrion. So which part of mitochondrion resembles the hydroelectric dam? So we know that mitochondrion, you got the outer membrane and inner membrane. So this process occurs in inner membrane, which, okay, in the entire inner membrane, either the part is not folded or the part is folded, all are considered as inner membrane. So it can occur anywhere in our inner membrane. Okay, so what I have enlarged this section of the mitochondrion to show you that this is the outer membrane, this black color line, and this is the intermembrane space between outer and inner membrane. This is inner membrane. So outer membrane is freely permeable to H+ ion. Now the H+ ion here, I can call it as a hydrogen ion, or proton. Okay, in words, I call this hydrogen ion or proton, or you write in symbol form means H+. Why is it called proton? Because it's positively charged. Okay, so I call it hydrogen ion or proton. So where is my reservoir that stores the water? Now, reservoir stores water, but in the mitochondrion, I store H+ instead of water. So I store H+ instead of water. Where do I store it? I store it in the intermembrane space here. So this is where I store a lot of H+. Okay. So then what happens? So where's my gate? Where's my turbine? So my gate is the stock particle. Stock particle. So this stock particle looks like the nail on the wall, right? So you got a neck, a very thin neck, and the head that is bigger. So this thin neck is actually the proton. So the stock particles are made up of two components, right? The neck part and the head part, right? So the neck part is actually the proton channel protein. It's a channel protein for proton. So the proton can diffuse across this channel protein. And the head part is an enzyme called the ATP synthase, which is also ATP synthetase. Okay, ATP synthase is short form, or ATP synthetase. Both are correct. So this is my stock particle. So so this is cytoplasm here, outside the mitochondria, and this is matrix inside the mitochondrion. Now, because the outer membrane is freely permeable and the inner membrane is impermeable to H+, we're referring to H+, our permeability. So therefore, H+ cannot simply cross the inner membrane. So therefore, the matrix will have got low H+ concentration because H+ is stored here. It cannot simply cross the membrane. So there's high H+ concentration in the intermembrane space and low H+ concentration in the matrix. So high here, low here. So because of that, H+ will diffuse across the channel protein in stock particle. So it diffuse across. Okay, so when it diffuse across, let's say this one diffuse across the stock particle, then it will turn this ATP synthase, like turning the turbine. It will actually turn. It will turn the ATP synthase. So when the ATP synthase is being turned, okay, then ATP will be synthesized. So ATP will be synthesized from ADP and PI. ADP plus PI. So this is how ATP is synthesized in the mitochondrion by chemiosmosis. So why do they call this chemiosmosis? Because chemi here refers to my H+ ion. Right? In a reservoir, it is a water that passed through the turbine, causing the electricity produced. Over here is H+, pass through the membrane. So osmosis means pass through the membrane, right? But osmosis in this case, not water, is H+. So pass through the membrane, which is the inner membrane, and then leading to ATP synthesis. So this is called chemiosmosis in the mitochondrion. Okay? Can? So I think I better stop here. I will continue with chemiosmosis in the chloroplast tomorrow. All right? I'll carry on with it tomorrow. So I'll stop here today.